Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to tackle a really big topic, marginalization in India. We'll dig into the source material to understand the experiences of both the Adivasi and Muslim communities.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we'll get a grip on what marginalization even means. Then we'll dive into two key examples in India. After that, we'll break down the cycle that keeps people trapped, and we'll wrap up by looking at the fight for rights and a path forward.
Okay, first things first, let's really pin down what it means to be pushed to the edges of society.
So you hear this word thrown around all the time, right? Marginalization. But what does it actually feel like? Well, it's when a person or an entire group is basically treated like they don't matter. It's about being systematically shut out from resources, from good jobs, or even from having a voice in the decisions that shape your life.
Now, this is a super important point. When we talk about a minority in this context, it's not just about counting heads. It's really all about power. A community can be marginalized because they have less access to resources, a lower social standing, and way less influence than the dominant culture.
So with that definition in mind, let's see how this plays out with our first case study, India's Adivasi communities.
The word Adivasi, that literally means original inhabitants. And for thousands of years, their entire world, their culture, their beliefs, everything has been completely intertwined with the forests they call home. And get this, it's not just one group. We're talking about over 500 different Adivasi groups in India.
And this right here just perfectly captures the huge shift in their status. Think about it. Back in the day, empires literally depended on Adivasis for access to valuable forest resources. They were the gatekeepers, the experts. Fast forward to today, and that picture is completely flipped on its head, with Adivasi communities often seen as powerless and pushed to the fringes.
So today, Adivasis make up around 8% of India's population. But here's the thing. While they were once the guardians of the land, their story now is so often one of displacement. And just look at these numbers. It's pretty staggering. Even though they're only 8% of the population, Adivasis account for more than half of all the people displaced by big industrial projects like mines and dams. And in some states, it's even worse. That number shoots up to a mind-blowing 79%. They are bearing the brunt of development in a huge way. And you have to understand, when they lose their land, it's not just like losing a house. It's everything. Their main way of making a living, their food source, their traditions, their customs, their whole identity is tied to that land. This often throws them into this awful cycle of poverty, forced to move to cities for whatever low-paying, unstable work they can find. This quote, wow. This quote from Gobind Maran really just hits you, right? It puts a human face on all those numbers we just saw. It's not just about losing land. He's talking about losing their cremation ground, their temple, their well, their entire community's lifeblood. It just makes you ask, how do you survive that?
Okay, let's shift gears now and look at marginalization through the lens of India's Muslim community.
So, according to the 2011 census, Muslims are about 14.2% of the population in India, but they're still often considered a marginalized community. So, what's going on there?
Well, a big piece of the puzzle is that on a bunch of key development markers, the community has been falling behind. For example, major government reports, like the Soccer Committee report, have pointed out that when you look at things like how many years kids spend in school, the average for Muslim communities is lower than for others. But it's not just about the numbers, not just economics. The social side of it is a huge deal too. Sometimes, customs and practices that make a community unique, like wearing a burqa or a certain type of cap, can be used by others to paint the entire group as different. And that difference can sometimes, unfortunately, become a hook for prejudice.
So you have these economic issues, these social issues. How do they all connect? Well, they often feed into what's called the cycle of disadvantage.
It really is a vicious cycle. It can start with something like a harmful stereotype. That stereotype then fuels prejudice in society, and that prejudice doesn't just stay as a thought, it turns into actual discrimination, which can make it tough to get a good job or find a place to live. And all of that leads to a loss of economic power and a sense that you have no voice, no political clout. And this cycle can have some really serious consequences in the real world. One is something called ghettoization, where a community kind of gets pushed into living in its own separate areas. And in the worst-case scenarios, this kind of prejudice can boil over into real hatred and, tragically, even violence. Okay, so that brings us to a really critical part of this story, the tools that exist to fight back against all this.
You know, the Indian Constitution was fundamentally designed to promote equality and justice for everyone. It has these specific protections, these safeguards built right in for minorities as part of their fundamental rights. The whole idea is to protect the country's incredible cultural diversity and make sure no single group can just dominate everyone else. And importantly, every single citizen has the right to go to the courts if they feel their rights are being trampled on.
And this is so important to remember. This is not a story of passive victims. Marginalized communities have an incredible history of struggle and resistance. They've used that very constitution we just talked about to stand up and fight for their rights. Adivasi activists, for example, have fought for decades, which led to big wins like the Forest Rights Act of 2006, a law designed to give them back their rights to their ancestral lands.
So, that leaves us with this final massive question. The laws are there, the protections are written down on paper, providing this incredible blueprint for justice. But the real challenge, the one we all face, is closing that gap between the words on the page and the reality people live every single day. So what does it actually take to make those promises of equality and inclusion real for everyone?